Welcome back to the CreaTech stage at the CogX Hybrid Festival 2021, co-curated with the UK Creative Industries Council, a forum between government and industry which brings together all sides of the creative industries, from film to fashion, advertising to architecture, games to music, performance to publishing. You can find out more about us at thecreativeindustries.co.uk. A big thank you to our CreaTech partners and allies, Digital Catapult, Facebook, Moore Kingston Smith, and UKRI AHRC. I'm Janet Hull, and I lead the CreaTech programme for the Creative Industries Council, and I'm also Director of Marketing Strategy at the IPA. It's my pleasure to be your MC today. I'm really looking forward to our next session, a 30-minute conversation about portals into the metaverse. The word metaverse has been on CreaTech stage already this week. It's obviously a hot topic right now. Herman Narula and Ben Vickers discussed it on Monday, and we've been hearing about NVIDIA launching a virtual world and Epic Games bringing together $1 billion to launch a metaverse. So there's some big players in on the act. Nevertheless, there's still lots of room for innovators and startups. In this session, we're going to hear from Inder Phull, CEO and founder of Pixelynx, and Robby Young, CEO, Animoca Brands. They'll talk about their work developing collectible goods at the cutting edge of gaming, music, fashion, and art as portals into the metaverse. Over to you guys.
Thank you.
Hi.
Hey, Robby, how are you?
Good. How are you, Inder?
Yeah, I'm very good, thanks. Yeah, super excited, and it's a pleasure to be on this talk with you. Of course, I've been a fan of Animoca for a while, and I guess just to give context for everyone watching in, really the kind of overarching discussion that we wanted to touch on was the metaverse, gaming, and how these kind of pillars are starting to shape society as we go forward. Gaming's always had a natural, really important place in culture, and it seems like it's starting to consume culture even more than ever before. And I think the COVID pandemic has also sped things up massively in a number of different ways. So just quickly on my background, I'm the CEO of Pixelynx. Our vision is to basically bring fans closer to their favorite artists and brands using blockchain and gaming technology. We see a really interesting opportunity to create almost a new form of content and a new format that basically pushes the boundaries of storytelling whilst giving fans new ways to engage and interact with their favorite brands and IP. Robby, I'd love to hear a little bit more on your background, and then we can jump into Animoca and how you got there.
Sure. Well, I've always been in telecoms, media, and technology, TMT, over the past very long time. Let's just say I started out in analog before digital, so that we'll put that timeline in the sand. And have spent the last 10 years focused on games at Animoca, originally purely on mobile and now across all platforms. And one of the things that we've really focused on these last 4 years has been the intersection of blockchain technology and games, because it's our belief that we're at a sort of an inflection point in technology, where we're starting to see, games have been for a long time the largest mass entertainment medium. So they are, there's more distribution and more people playing games than consuming any other type of medium. And so it's very exciting to connect that audience with new technology. And so we think that games are a great way to bring blockchain to a mass audience, and at the same time, give them all kinds of features and ways to experience game environments, metaverses, whatever you want to call them, in brand new ways that will really benefit them as consumers.
Amazing. Animoca has definitely been at the forefront of this space, this kind of gaming blockchain overlap for the past, I guess, since its development over the last 5 years. And, you've just recently reached unicorn status with your very auspicious raise of $88,888,000.88, I believe. Can you tell us a little bit more about the overarching ecosystem of the Animoca brands kind of group? And tell us a bit more about the ventures and investments. Yeah.
So we basically, when we started out, we got into blockchain gaming actually in partnership with a company then called Axiom Zen, now called Dapper Labs, with a product called CryptoKitties that they created. So we were their partner to publish CryptoKitties in Greater China. And that was the original blockchain game project, the original NFT project. I'm sure there's going to be debates on Twitter about that statement, but it was the first one to really, I think, capture the public imagination. And it caught our imagination as well. And so from that point, we decided to pivot all our attention for our game business on blockchain games and on what it meant to introduce blockchain technology into games. And so from there, we started to create partnerships. We were already the largest licensee of third-party brands in mobile gaming. And so we continued to sort of double down on that strategy and also look towards bringing in licensed content into blockchain games as well, because we felt that this was a strategy that would really connect well with the potential of blockchain for gaming, which is on two fronts. One is true digital ownership of content, and the other one is interoperability of content. And so I think on the ownership piece, definitely brands resonate with consumers. And so if we can come to them with entertainment products of brands they know and love, then the ability to own those items as in-game, playable items, we thought would be a fantastic opportunity that would really catch their attention. So we launched a game called F1 Delta Time in partnership with Formula One, and that was our first sort of major brand partnership in the blockchain game space.
Interesting, and we'll touch on some of those in a second. I guess the ecosystem that you have in Animoca with a number of different properties like the Sandbox, for example, Formula One Delta Time, they're all using slight different variations of blockchain technology. But in a way, I mean, Animoca is building a metaverse in a number of different formats, I think. So before we go into that, could you describe, I guess, from your perspective, what the metaverse is or could be, and how would you kind of explain it to a novice?
Sure. So the best way to explain the metaverse is to recommend you read a book called Snow Crash, because that was the gateway drug for a lot of us who started in the 90s thinking about what it could mean to have a metaverse. But there have been fantastic, Hollywood interpretations of that, everything from the Matrix to Ready Player One. The idea being that there is a virtual reality, where we can live our digital selves, our digital lives, and interact with each other. Although I think that's the most straightforward analogy, that you basically go into a three-dimensional version of, like living in a movie or something like that. And there are companies out there that are working to create those type of persistent environments, ourselves included. We have a project called the Sandbox that aims at doing that. However, I do think it's appropriate that we use the term metaverse actually as a more generic concept of how we're living digital lives now in parallel to our physical lives. So in fact, social media, should be part of the definition of a metaverse, and other types of content consumption, because the reality is we're all spending a lot more time, as you said at the beginning, especially, exacerbated by the pandemic, online, communicating with each other, either in a version of a physical interaction like us here on a video, or if we were represented by avatars of each other, we may have the same experience, but because they're avatars, we might then call it a metaverse experience.
Interesting. And I guess, when you think about where the metaverse is going, NFTs specifically seem to have a lot of power in terms of the nature of how these digital ecosystems will evolve. And I guess some people ask the question, are they needed in these contexts? And I think, the Sandbox gives a very good example of how NFTs and blockchain technology can work to change, almost create a new economic tool for people to, in a way, earn a living from playing in some of these games. In some cases, also just having ownership over their kind of assets and in-game items that they've purchased. But could you touch a little bit on the role of NFTs in the metaverse and how these two are kind of almost exist in a symbiosis together in the future?
So I think what NFTs and blockchain provide to the idea of a metaverse really is an economy, most fundamentally, an actual economy that economists would recognize as such, and as a result, democratization. So something like Minecraft, for example, or Roblox, those are also metaverses. World of Warcraft is a metaverse, but they are essentially top-down economies. It's like living in a fiefdom, basically, because everything is controlled by the developer, and so there are a lot of limits on what can and cannot be done, because the assets, everything you see and interact with, belongs to the developer, and you spend time and money essentially enjoying their environment, a little bit like going to a theme park, right? You go to the theme park, you enjoy it, but you don't get to take anything home. Imagine if you have to leave everything from the gift shop at the theme park when you go out the door. That's kind of the experience. Whereas what we can do now with NFTs is, because we can offer this potential of having true digital ownership of those objects that you interact with in the metaverse, whether it's your own avatar or the virtual house you build for yourself, or whatever those objects are, because they can be owned by the users, then the users feel a sense of ownership. And I know that sounds paradoxical, but they will tend to then invest their time and money into the reality of their experience in the metaverse, because they know it means something. And the extension of that would be the play-to-earn business model, which you mentioned. So because there is an actual economy which is underpinned by the security of blockchain, it allows people to then exchange their goods inside the metaverse. You can have commerce, and that's something that changes the experience dramatically, because once you enable commerce, you enable people to recoup some of the investment they make in the metaverse, and create things from which they can profit. So for example, users can generate their own content, which they can sell to other users and generate a profit.
It's really fascinating. I think when you start to look at gaming, gaming as it is, but then gaming as a tool for social mobility as well. And I think there's some really interesting examples of people, playing in some of these ecosystems, whether it's just selling NFTs or actually kind of selling in-game assets in things like Axie Infinity or Sandbox, down the line. Like, what do you think about the role of gaming in terms of a tool for social mobility? Do you think it will get to that stage where, people from, let's say, third world countries actually earn a better living through in-game interaction as opposed to real life interaction? Definitely.
I think that potential is always there, because it's just another type of remote digital work. And so whether you're picking up the phone for a call center or you're grinding away hours in a game to produce in-game rewards, there's no difference. You're still, getting paid for the time and the hours of labor that you're putting in. I think the interesting thing is that as a game developer, we've actually always had this kind of concept in gaming, where when you create a game, you create different paths in a free-to-play game. You create a path for grinders, who are people who grind basically literally hours and hours trying to achieve something in the game in order to increase their success. And then you have another path, which is the spending path, because there are people who enjoy playing games who may be, cash rich but time poor, business executives who like to play games when they're waiting in line at the airport, for example, and they're happy to spend $5, $10, $20 on an in-app purchase to save time in the game, whereas the starving student at university would rather spend 5 hours playing the game, grinding away for the same achievement, but not have to spend the money. And NFTs and blockchain now codify that economic relationship to allow those two types of players to coexist and benefit each other, because now that student can actually then sell his wares to the busy businessman, to use a stereotypical analogy.
Mm-hmm. No, it makes perfect sense. And actually, again, really fascinating is, and it's, some people are still getting their head around this concept that virtual real estate is a thing, and it exists, mm-hmm. and there is a market for people wanting to invest in owning parts of a virtual environment. And so I'd love to hear a little bit more about the Sandbox and the concept of virtual real estate there. And then it touches into a topic of, does this then open up new job roles that never existed, for example, or maybe digitization of job roles, for example, a real estate agent in the real world also then being an agent in the virtual landscape. Do you think that ends up being the kind of scenario?
It does, and in fact, it's not so much of a stretch as one might think in terms of a paradigm shift. I think what this does is actually it just expands it to a broader audience than has been able to experience it before. So what happens in something like the Sandbox, the Sandbox is a game that we've created, which is essentially a metaverse, but it's done in a pixelated art style. So imagine, old 8-bit animation art style. And the reason we did that was actually by design, because what we wanted was for this to be a user-generated content world. So we wanted to keep the art style relatively simplistic, because we want everybody to feel that they can be a creator as well. Just like if I give you a box of Legos or a set of oil paints, the chances are you'll be much happier, much quicker with the Legos than the oil paints, because the oil paints take a bit more skill. And so what we wanted with the Sandbox is for people to be able to have it as an actual a metaphorical sandbox to do what they like with the space. You can create, a house for yourself. You can create an art gallery to display your NFT art collection. You can, Atari is making a theme park inside so that people can have game experiences within the metaverse. So it's kind of a game within a game, so to speak. But the idea is for it to be completely open and free so that users can create whatever they like, and we supply them with the tools to create those things. The key ingredient, of course, is that it is underpinned by an economy and a set of rules that everybody agrees to. So in our case, there is this idea of virtual land. So there is a finite amount of real estate in the metaverse. And that way, people have to, when they want to create something, they need to own land. And it has turned out actually to be a fantastic metaphor for creating this kind of content, because everybody understands the real estate metaphor. And what we've found is that when thinking about the pricing of land, we didn't actually really set pricing. A lot of land was auctioned, so it was up to the users to decide what the pricing would be. And we've noticed that land adjacent to other famous owners of land becomes more expensive, which is very similar to what happens in the real world. If you live next to a park or a river or something, your property may be worth more. And so a lot of what we bring from our physical lives carries over into the metaverse very easily. And so I think that's one of the reasons that virtual land has actually been quite successful, because it's relatively straightforward to get your head around the idea.
That's super fascinating. And, maybe going a little bit philosophical and a little bit in the future with my next question, but do you think these kind of emerging metaverses end up becoming this playground to almost test ideas before bringing them back into physical reality? In some cases, we're kind of extrapolating everything that happens in the real world and then bringing them into these digital spaces. But now you're providing the economic tools and the foundations. In some cases, there's things like DAOs, which we might have a chance to touch on, maybe not in this context. But, do you think there's almost this really interesting kind of learning process where people start forming new ideas about how society could be run in these virtual spaces before we end up bringing those concepts back into the way we run a real society, for example?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because I think one of the things that blockchain as a technology has brought into the philosophical side is this idea of it being trustless. So the fundamental principle of blockchain is that everything's verifiable publicly, and that when you do a transaction, you don't need to know who the other person is or trust them, because there's always collateral exchanging hands, exchanging value. And so when you bring that metaphor into the metaverse, it's very interesting, because you can then coalesce concepts of governance within a group that are just based on, okay, these are the rules. And so we're governed by these rules, and within those rules, anybody can do whatever they like, because they're still going to be restricted by certain rules. So for example, your economy is based on a token, which is your virtual currency in the metaverse. If the issuer of that currency does something that the community doesn't like, they sell your token. The value of your token goes down. So you have a financial incentive to play by the rules along with everybody else. So it's that alignment of interest, I think, that the economy facilitates.
It feels like a lot of the people who are the early adopters are kind of believing in the system of blockchain as a whole in terms of its potential to transform society in a number of ways, from the transparency benefits of what it provides, and like you said, the trustless kind of environment. what are some of the challenges you think the industry, the gaming and blockchain industry, is going to face over the next 10 years to drive adoption?
So I think the user onboarding process is still in its early stages, meaning that most of the people who are consumers in this sector tend to be those who are relatively technically savvy. I think we're going to see a lot of great products coming out in the next 12 months that are going to attempt to solve some of those issues where onboarding, will be approaching something as simple as a mobile app or things like that. But that's still a hurdle. I think one of the things I caution people to remember is that, smartphones were around for several years before we even got Angry Birds, don't forget. So there's a long way to go in the gestation of these technologies until they're really, the honed platforms that we're used to. I think the one important thing that's different about this blockchain revolution is that the idea is for it to be decentralized, which means not controlled by a single platform. And the gaming industry historically has been defined by distribution platforms. And that's a very interesting idea. So we began with console, then we moved, to PC, web, and then we're now in the mobile era. All these platforms still exist, of course, but just between console and mobile, that's four companies. And so the idea of there being a world where games and metaverses can exist without so much centralization and so much consolidation of distribution is quite interesting. And I think it really opens up opportunities for lots of smaller, players with really creative ideas to thrive.
Yeah, it's really fascinating. I think looking at the mechanics around how these new entities are almost, funded by the community in many senses. Like you said, the token ends up playing such an important role in how the technology or ecosystem is built. And so there's this natural relationship that is really important between player and potential organization, for example. What would you say, for example, in the next 10 years, what do we need to do to get things right so that we develop this ecosystem in a way that actually aligns with the vision and philosophies of what we all believe in terms of decentralization and equality, I guess, and transparency?
Yeah, I think one of the nice things is that this is very, the blockchain community is very, very similar, I think, to the open source community. And I find the blockchain movement to be similar to the open source movement because, if you want to develop a DApp, a decentralized app on a blockchain, all of the information is publicly available on the web, on GitHub, and you go out there, the tools are available, and you make something. And that's really fascinating. I think it has absolutely broadened the ability for people to participate, and you can see that in our nascent industry, because if I look around and try to write, if you said to me, okay, what are the 20 most influential companies in the blockchain gaming sector, and I put down a list, and then I put down another column of what is their primary geographic location of the team, it could be anywhere. So unlike previous tech revolutions, this one is actually not centralized in San Francisco on a global basis. And we have, I'd say, a level playing field between East Asian companies, European, Russian companies, North American companies, etc., because the technology is so easily available to anybody who wants to learn it. And that is very interesting because I think that that's actually forming a lot of the cultural fabric of what we're seeing online as well, because I'm, in the metaverse, I'm just as likely to bump into a Russian person or a Thai person or a Finnish person.
No, it's super interesting. And I guess now we've got a few minutes left. So I wanted to just touch on, for someone who's just entering into this space, let's say that they've been hearing the conversation about NFTs and the metaverse, what would be your suggestion on where they start as an experience? Let's say the reading is something you could do on the side. There's amazing interviews and local content, but where would you send them to as your first kind of step to say this will give you a good insight into how you think this world will unfold?
Sure. I would say the first thing I would do is, of course, I'm going to plug my own product, so brace yourself. I would send them to the Sandbox first, because I think the Sandbox is they have a wonderful community, and you can also get involved not just via the website and the tools there, but you can go to Discord or Telegram or other social channels and participate in the chats and ask people questions. People are really enthusiastic and passionate about the stuff that they're creating. And so you can go in as a new, player and just say, look, I just came in, this looks really cool, what do I do? And people will be more than happy to help you and walk you through it. And I think that sense of community is a really key ingredient of why this can be so successful, because the reason that we all agree to get together in the metaverse and hang out together in our digital selves is because there's a sense of community there.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think the Sandbox is a really good starting point, because again, the mechanics are more easily understood for many people, and you'll see a lot of IP that people would resonate with and kind of have some connection to, so they can kind of piece the journey together from that point. So yeah, I completely agree. And I think the whole ecosystem, like what you've done with F1 Delta Time, I know we're going to run out in a second, but again, one that I would definitely suggest people to also look at in terms of a more complex example of how gaming and collectible culture and play to earn kind of come together to create an interesting ecosystem. That's definitely one that I think a lot of people have taken inspiration from too.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate that.
No problem. Well, I think, yeah, we're probably just about running on time here. So it was a pleasure to hear from you, Robby, and hear your thoughts on how Animoca is growing. And like I said, I think everyone's watching what you're doing in the space, and definitely looking at you as one of the core leaders in the whole gaming blockchain evolution. So yeah, thank you for your time.
Appreciate it. Thanks, Inder. And we're looking forward to continuing to work together on building the metaverse.
Yeah, thanks. So I think Stephanie will join us.
Thank you so much, Inder and Robby, for expanding our understanding of the gaming blockchain economy and the potential to transform society, opening up new opportunities through a decentralized model. Certainly, I'll be looking into the Sandbox and finding out more about it and sharing the word with my colleagues in the advertising sector. A fascinating exposition of what's possible. Thank you so much. And at 2 o'clock on the dot, we have another session. So I'll call a halt to this right now.